We were mentioning a little earlier that most extraordinary, audacious and unsettling of recent military operations, the smuggling of drones into Russia by Ukraine and the destruction of Russian cruise missile-capable bombers all over the place as a result. A great victory for Ukraine, very clever, very carefully planned, and Spider's Web, as it was called, is being compared inside Russia to Pearl Harbor. But it does make me wonder whether it's good news for the rest of us that drones can be packed into anonymous lorries, driven anywhere, and then suddenly released unexpectedly. Let's talk now to Robert Tollast, an expert in drones and land warfare at RUSI. How did this compare, I asked him, with other examples of asymmetric warfare?
So in terms of attacking an enemy's air force on the ground with commando raids, special forces raids, obviously people are talking about the SAS in North Africa, very boldly raiding Luftwaffe airfields. In 1964, the Viet Cong destroyed around 30 American airplanes on the ground in the Vietnam War. And of course, Ukraine has been trying very hard with mostly fixed-wing, long-range drones to hit these bases with very mixed success. So you could also recall the Pebble Island raid in the Falklands War in 1982, where the SAS raided Argentine planes on the ground and destroyed them. This is really unprecedented because it's a remote operation. So they've taken this idea of audacious ground raids to hit the enemy air force, where the enemy have an advantage in the air, hit them on the ground, but to do it remotely with drones, getting the commandos out, getting the special operators out of Russia before they could be caught. It's really quite incredible.
One thing that occurs to me, and will occur to a lot of people, Robert, is if it can be done there, it can be done almost anywhere. Pack drones into
a little bit nascent. There are a lot of solutions in the West, from AI-powered machine guns to microwaves and jamming, essentially. But unless you're extremely vigilant, there is a danger that a determined enemy could get one of those drones through. We saw that to an extent. I was mentioning ground raids against air bases in 2012. The Taliban attacked Bagram Air Base in Afghanistan and destroyed 6 Harrier jets on the ground. If they'd had attack drones then, which they didn't, it could have been much worse. And of course, it's not impossible to imagine that being conducted by a terror group in the West on our own soil, potentially.
Yes, I was going to say, if you are actually in charge of trying to defend RAF Lakenheath or Salisbury Plain or any of the big British military bases in this country, you must be slightly worried this afternoon.
I think so. I mean, I certainly hope that we've been watching lessons from Syria, for example. So small drones were used to attack an airbase there in 2018, a Russian airbase. And of course, the key thing is that we've got our aircraft in hardened shelters as much as possible. And if you go back to the Cold War, this was something that was regularly drilled, just keeping aircraft exposed, vulnerable for the shortest time possible, because of course we knew that our airfields could be targeted with a wide variety of weapons. Of course, now it's drones, and then it was missiles in those times. So in that regard, it's really not. It's not that we're terribly vulnerable, but it's certainly a case of doubling down on our tactics and procedures to make sure that these places are safe. And that will probably come down to a combination of radio frequency jamming, jamming the video links and the control links to drones, and also potentially what they call hard kill measures. Now, of course, in a European country, you don't necessarily want to fire machine guns at drones, of course, where there's civilian population nearby. But there are laser weaponry that can dazzle drones, that can blind the sensors, that would be a lot safer to use near an airbase or a critical infrastructure in the West. And the Israelis have that with their Iron Beam, for example.
Very, very interesting. Final question, Robert. Clearly, this is a huge humiliation for Vladimir Putin and for the Russian military, and there is going to be a retaliation of some kind. Any thoughts about that?
Well, it's hard to say the extent that this has damaged the Russian strategic aviation and nuclear-capable aircraft. There are varying reports of 10% of that fleet to 30% being destroyed of their heavy strategic bombers. In terms of visual losses, it may be a little bit lower than that. I think one of the real depths of destructive power that the Russians still have is the VKS, their aerospace forces. So indeed, they could launch very terrible strikes on Ukraine again, as they have done. Only the other day, they launched nearly 500 drone attacks, 500 drones against targets in Ukraine. So absolutely, there's a lot more damage that they can do. But I think the momentum strategically might be shifting towards Ukraine. I think they're continually out-innovating and out-maneuvering the Russians on the battlefield and what you call the deep strike, which is essentially what this operation was.
Absolutely fascinating. Robert Tollast, thank you so much for talking to LBC.